We are back on the road to City Hall, and we turn our attention now to the City Council, where the legislative session is quickly drawing to a close for the year. City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito is trying to push through a vote next week on a bill that would greatly expand the number of street vendors allowed in our city. But many business owners say that those vendors' carts will compete with existing restaurants and stores and would cause additional congestion. Tonight, I'm joined by some of these opponents. Andrew Ridgie is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. Rob Burns is the co-chair of the New York City Bid Association Vendor Working Group. He's also the president of the East Midtown Partnership. And Leslie Ramos is here. She's the co-chair of the New York City Bid Association Vendor Working Group and executive director of the 82nd Street Partnership. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And let me ask you, I'll start with you, Andrew. What's the problem, as you see it, with the vending carts as it is, without talking about an expansion? What's the challenge? It's supposed to be something of an ecosystem where you can get something inside a store and then you can get something on the street, and they're not the same thing and they're not competing.
Thanks, Errol. I mean, first, in this conversation, I think it's important to just acknowledge that the people working on carts are working extremely hard, and we respect that. And there's great food on the carts. I mean, the chicken and rice by my office is incredible. So it's not a competition issue, it's an unfair competition issue. And on a day when the City Council held a hearing to talk about the dilemma of small businesses closing, I mean, we have vacant storefronts all over the city. To now introduce thousands of new permits for carts that will then directly in front of a restaurant sell a similar product for literally half the price, because they don't have to pay the skyrocket high rents, they don't have the high labor costs and all of these other costs. So it just doesn't make sense to push this through right during the holiday season. We should sit down and have a comprehensive conversation about what we can do to allow vending and preserve our brick and mortar restaurants. And
a lot of this currently is done sort of business strip by business strip, right? Like in your area, if somebody wants to come along and they have a valid permit, you would in some way have a kind of a conversation to prevent exactly what Andrew is talking about, right? Direct competition?
So we actually supposed to be a no visibility zone. That means that there's supposed to be no vendors there except veterans. But that's not what's happening right now. It's pretty much a free-for-all. And there's areas, especially along Roosevelt Avenue, where there's vendors that have been there for 20, 25 years that are being displaced by new vendors or people working for someone else, and taking over the area, taking away the space in front of the business that are there, like small pop-in shop, also immigrant stores. So we want something that protects the entire ecosystem that we have there. We know it is very fragile, but we have to, we like our vendors. I would say maybe we're different than other bits because it's part of our culture, it's part of our community, but it has to be in a way that is balanced and there's clarity for the businesses, the brick and mortar, as well as for the vendors, where they're supposed to be and where they're not supposed to be.
Now, there was a discussion that was going on, and I think even some hearings a while ago, right, where these issues and many others, we heard from the vendors, a lot of these issues were surfaced. This is actually a very old question that's been argued for a couple of hundred years in New York. Why the bill now at the last minute, and do you think that your concerns were taken into account?
Why the bill now? That is the best question of the night. Yes, the hearing was October of last year. We had about 1 week's notice after the introduction of the bill. People were mobilized, people testified. Then it went into the negotiation phase. We continued to reach out to council members. We continued to reach out to the speaker's staff and the administration. Then everything went silent until Tuesday. Tuesday, 2 days ago, was the day we finally saw legislation. It is not online yet, so the public is still trying to find out what exactly is in it. Were our concerns taken seriously? I don't think so, because, and I say that with due respect to the supporters, what we advocated for, and I need to make clear, the position of the New York City Bid Association is not anti-vendor. It is for a sane, comprehensive system of vending in the system. On that, that'll benefit vendors as well as small businesses, as well as residents. There's a lot of people affected that I don't think were really part of this conversation. They talk to us. Ultimately, I don't know if they listen to us.
There is a need to sort of rationalize this, right? I mean, because If you're a veteran, you can get certain kind of permits. First Amendment, if you're out there selling, poetry or literature, you don't need any regulation. That's free speech. If you're dealing with selling certain kinds of food, the Department of Health starts to step in. And there's been a cap on vending permits for years and years and years, so that a black market has emerged where somebody owns the permit and they sell it to somebody else, or they lease it or rent it to somebody else. So it's very, very complicated. Then you start, you overlay some citizenship issues about the status of the person who's doing all of this, and it gets yet more complicated again. So one thing in this bill that I thought did make sense, regardless of how late it was or whether or not people were consulted, is that they try to sort of rationalize it, right, and make it so that there's one central place to go and offer an office of vendor permits or something like that?
Yeah, and looking for an enforcement squad that's dedicated to mobile vending, which we're a big supporter of. But the reality is that there are tons of different regulations on the books right now that the city just hasn't or can't effectively enforce. So now to say we're going to focus on enforcement would allow thousands of new permits and vendors to be on the streets. It seems counterproductive. Why don't we figure out how to address the enforcement issue, then deal with the underground market? Permits cost about $200 for every 2 years. The underground market, they're going upwards of $25,000. That's not fair to people. We should get those markets out of the market, and we should give these permits to people that want to work hard and be entrepreneurs.
Right, but just like with taxi medallions, you have to introduce more in order to end that kind of black market inflation, right? And make it so that the price does come down and that more people have a shot at it. Or to do one thing that I noticed in the legislation, make it so that if you own the permit, you have to be the vendor. There's no more, selling it or renting.
That's a good thing, and that's something we've advocated for. We have to start with the fact that this market is in fact not legal right now. What people are engaging in is not legal activity. We don't want to penalize the vendors, but we also don't think adding over the course of the next decade 3,350 new vending permits to the streets is going to do anything to clean that up. For those new permits, they will be tied directly to the vendor. But the other 5,100, I believe, food permits that are out there right now are going to continue. The black market won't go away. That's still, the process is going to continue.
Is that a fix that you would support, sort of converting those old ones to the same standard, which is that it's only for a natural flesh and blood person?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see those old permits go to people that are actually working on the street. And I think that this is done correctly. You can create a mechanism where you take out the black market, you take away those people who are basically living in other places while they have workers here. So that is what's so important, to do the enforcement office correctly. The current bill gives the mayor 9 months to establish an office. It only calls for inspection of vendors once a year. So it's great that the legislation says you have to, you have to work where you have the permit. But if you go into the visit only once a year, how is that enforcement? There's no mechanism to really enforce that and take away the underground market.
And is the Department of Small Business Services, which is, I guess, one of the primary contacts for your kind of businesses, have they weighed in on this? Have they been a part of this discussion?
Our understanding is the administration overall is not supportive of this. I don't know if the Department of Small Business Services specifically has weighed in. There are some good things in the bill that SBS could that could fall under their purview, better training of vendors. But it's all got to be part of a big, comprehensive reform to the system, and that is not in this.
That's part, I was just saying, that's also part of the point. It's almost like pinball when we're having this conversation, because you're right, Errol, there are so many different issues that are kind of chunked in this one big issue. So I'd say to Councilmember Espinal, who is the chair of Consumer Affairs Committee, where this bill is, the council and the administration, let's slow down. Let's all get together in the new year, and let's work on a comprehensive reform that's going to help the vendors, that's going to help the brick and mortar businesses, and address the concerns of the community.
3 years ago, the Bid Association, when we first started hearing, there was the Lift the Caps movement, and we started approaching council members, and we said, first there should be a study, because everything's anecdote. Nobody knows how many vendors are out there. Nobody knows how many are illegally vending. Nobody really knows, except for anecdote, what the underground permits are going for. We were accused of wanting a study to stall. Now here we are 3 years later, we're still operating by anecdote.
Okay, well, we're going to do our best to sort of replace anecdote with some solid facts and discussion. We'll see what happens on Tuesday, but the issue and the discussion will continue. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a short break here. Coming up next, Suffolk County Executive Steve Bellone will join me to discuss what his Republican tax bill would mean, what the Republican tax bill would mean for his area. Tax-paying New Yorkers, especially those living in the city suburbs, could be hit hard. We'll talk about it in just a minute. Stay with us.